Hi Year 7, in this video I'm going to be showing you how we measure some things, and we'll look at looking at measuring length, which you would have done quite a bit of in primary school in mathematics and in science. Alright, so to measure length we use lots of different equipment. The first one and the most obvious one, you would use a ruler. If a 30cm ruler isn't long enough, you might use one of these, which is a 1 metre ruler, so it's much longer to measure longer things. If you needed to measure an even further distance, you might use something like this tape measure, which is up to 30 metres long. Or even longer than that, you might use something like this trundle wheel. You probably use these in primary school, alright, but these measure, like you can measure like a distance, like maybe the length of the oval on one of these, and when you wheel it, you hear it will click once every metre, and then you can count the clicks. But most often for measuring length you might use one of these three, a ruler, a metre ruler, or a tape measure. So when I measure something like this scores mat, a ruler would be sufficient. Now when we line it up, we need to make sure we line up what we're measuring with the 0 centimetre mark. Not the end of the ruler, because you can see there that it's not going to be very accurate because there's actually half a centimetre there where there's no markings. So I make sure I line up my gauze mat. I line up the edge of my gauze mat here with my 0 centimetre mark, and then on this side I line up with the other end. Now when I'm measuring it, I need to make sure that I measure at eye level, okay? That's why I need to have I need to stand above it and look down. It's no good me measuring from this side, because if I'm looking down at this angle, it's actually going to skew my vision a little bit, or it might skew the measurements. We call that a parallax error. Okay, so I'm looking straight down on top of my ruler, and I can see that this gauze mat is 15.5 centimetres. So that's 15 centimetres and 5 millimetres. Because when I look at my scale, I can see that for every 1 centimetre there's 10 divisions in between, and I know that there's 10 millimetres per centimetre. So I know that every one of those lines represents 1 millimetre. So mine was 15 centimetres and 5 millimetres here, or 15.5. If I wanted to measure something like this table, for example, I would use a metre ruler, because trying to use this ruler, it's clearly not long enough to measure from here to here on the table. It's not long enough to measure the whole width, and it's not very accurate to measure 30 centimetres and then try and measure and see exactly how much the next length is. Alright, I'm likely to make an error there. So, because I'm measuring the width of this table, alright, now I've got my 0 at this end, but that's not very good for me because I can't line my eyes up on this side of the table, so I'm going to turn my ruler around. So make sure that the 0 mark, now on the metre ruler the 0 mark is actually at the very end. You can see that there. The 0 is at the very end of the ruler, so I'm going to line the 0 up at the table, and then make sure I'm looking straight down at this end of the table. Okay, and I can see that here it's 55.7 or 55 centimetres and 7 millimetres. Like my other ruler, we can see that my ruler measures in centimetres and has 10 divisions between each centimetre, so each one of those divisions represents a millimetre. If I wanted to measure something even longer again, like maybe the length of the long benches in the labs that are longer than 1 metre, then I might use something like this tape measure. So this tape measure can measure things that are up to 30 metres long, and these sometimes are a little bit tricky to read. So I'll show you how we read the scale on one of these. They're okay for the first metre, but you can see when I show you, firstly, that between every centimetre there's only 5 divisions. So between here, this is 10, 11 and 12 centimetres. So between every centimetre, all right, there's only 5 divisions, so each division actually represents 2 millimetres. So if I was to measure something, say here, that would actually be 11.4 millimetres, all right, because that's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Okay, so what it does is these tape measures mark out firstly 10, 20, 30, all right, and then afterwards 1, 2, 3, 4. So you need to actually figure out how long it is. So that's how I knew that was 10 plus 1 plus 4 gave me 11.4. All the way past the 1 metre mark, you'll notice that it's still doing the same thing. It's still showing me 10, 20, 30. But now you can see in red, it also says 1 metre. So I know now if I'm measuring something at this point in my tape measure, and I measured it to, say this point here, that would be 1 metre plus 10 centimetres plus 8 centimetres plus 2, 4, 6, 8 millimetres. Okay, so that would mean that would be 1 metre and 18.8 centimetres. All right, so that's how we use the tape measure. They're a little bit more difficult to read because you've got to take into account all the different parts of where you are on that tape measure. That's how we measure length in science. Thanks, Year 7.